In this excerpt from the Ben and Ryan show, the gang talks about how amazing everyone's old code is from 5 years ago, when to replace your old code, and how not to burn down the house.
So something that I like to bring up, which is obvious to most developers, is that like your 10-year-old code will be awful no matter what language it's in. Right?
Fact.
Your 5-year-old code. Like if you're not just a little tiny bit or more embarrassed about code you wrote a year ago, you're not growing as a developer, and you should probably take a desk job at that point and do other things. Honestly, I mean, that's mean a little bit, but that's the honest to God truth. The movement and speed with which the application development industry just flies is so fast that you're always going to have improvements. Plus, it's a practiced thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like you are always getting better, so your code is always getting better. You should be continually working on refactoring, improving, moving to, maybe new, more efficient methods. And the problem is that somewhere along the line, and this isn't just a problem with CF, I've seen plenty of it in every single language out there, that stopped happening. Whether that developer moved or they figured something was done, which it ain't done until you Control-A delete it, and maybe not even then. And then that sat and it rotted. And that's what code does. It sits there and rots, no matter how good, right? Even if it's Ben's code.
No, I'm so embarrassed by some of my old code. It's awful.
It's amazing. It's because
I'm going to go ahead and let me see if I can do this here. I'm going to try and share the screen. This is a screenshot I took of it. Let's see. And speaking of being embarrassed on the apps that you use for things, I took a screenshot. I put into Paint here for everybody.
Paint. Excellent. Is it Paint 3D?
That's going away.
Oh, what?
I know. I think this month.
Oh my gosh.
The warning
Disappointed noise.
So I should be using an Adobe product. I do apologize that I'm using Paint here.
Brutal.
So here's a screenshot. Oh, you know what? No one can see it.
I can see it.
There we go.
Oh, look at that! Burning down the house, refactoring costs. Yeah,
it's much funner. It's much more funner, much funnest. Yeah. It's funnier, but anyway, it's more fun to laugh at me when you actually can see the paint. So there we go. There's the formalness of the Ben and Ryan show on full display here.
There you go. Yeah, this is all great. I don't know who made this. This looks excellent. All points there are very solid. No, I mean, and all of these things are important to think about, right? So the costs, obviously, breaking things down. And I've seen this number 2 point. I don't think I spent much time during the talk because there was a lot of info and it went for a while. But I think people don't realize that, especially with an older app, right? So let's say you have an app and it's, maybe it's a top-down procedural. All the logic is in the pages. Awful architecture. It probably works and it probably makes you money, or else you wouldn't care about working on it, right? But if you just take that and just directly convert it, well, it's still awful. I don't care what language it's in. Like, oh, it's in Rust. Yeah, okay, that's great. Good job. Here's your latte. But like, it's still bad. But then if you convert that to a modern architecture, right, object-oriented, all the fun stuff, well, there's a risk you're going to miss something because every page is doing something. It might look like it's doing the same thing, but maybe there's a slight difference, right? So there is a risk, and the risk gets higher if you're moving into a different language because maybe they don't have that particular function, right? Maybe that works in a different way. Maybe caching works differently. There's like a million different things that could be different. So there's a risk even in just converting it in CF, but the further away you get from CF, the worse it is. Plus, it takes longer, so you have less time to fix it when it inevitably breaks. So,
I keep coming back to a quote from a presentation, and I wish I could remember who quoted this. But this was relating more to the monolith versus microservices architectural debates. And there was a slide, I think it's very famous at this point, that says something to the effect of, if you it's like, if you couldn't do a monolith correctly, what made you think you could do microservices correctly? And this to me feels very much on point with that. Like, if you can't maintain a Cold Fusion app, even if it's old, what makes you think that converting it is going to work well for you? I mean, like,
Right.
what makes you think you're going to understand all of the little business logic edge cases in the code that exists and is working today? And you have the chutzpah to think that you can then translate that into a different language, one that you're probably not that well versed in anyway, because that just seems to be the arc of the technology world.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ben, I've actually done this, so I'm not proud. Hey, I've been hired in the past to convert Cold Fusion to a different language, and literally for someone who at that point had been doing Cold Fusion for 20 something years, right? It was hard. It was hard for me having, basically encyclopedic knowledge of what CF was doing and a damn whole lot of C# experience. That was still a brutal process moving that over. And honestly, that company still exists, and they are 50% still to this day Cold Fusion. Guess which side of the house is growing? The CF shop side is actually growing because it's more efficient to work on that side. That is the side of the house that actually is, like, the ROI is worth putting people in.
Mhm.
They just certified their architect so that he could go and work on that side of things. Like, yeah, it's much easier to be an evangelist when your product is awesome.
I think people underestimate also the amount of weird logic that accumulates in an application over time. They say it was like no plan meets first contact with the enemy.
Yes.
None of your software designs survive first contact with the customer. They're going to find crazy stuff that they need your software to do, and someone has to build that into some weird little if statement that's 7 function calls deep. And when you're translating that into a different language, it's so easy to miss that stuff.
It is. It absolutely is. And I mean, and that's not even, like, and you're talking about like horrifically breaking code too. Like, sometimes the difference is that your performance goes down by 500% because switch statements work differently in a different language or something, right? Like there are these subtleties, and one is not going to break you, but your app doesn't have one. Your app has thousands of those.
I want to quick tangent here for a second, as we do on the show. I was listening to an episode, I can't remember what podcast it was, but they were talking all about breaking changes and how the concept of breaking changes is so much deeper than people often think.